There we go. Yeah, so this group of energy planners who have been working on the MERP program. We're pretty tight-knit at this point, and we all share information, so I figured it would just be easier for you to talk to all of us at once rather than dealing with us one-on-one. Hey, Shelley, thanks for joining. So I think it would behoove us to just get started, and then we can see where the conversation takes us. Just so everybody knows, I haven't actually spoken to Emily about this yet, so this will be informative for everyone. But I think, Emily, you reached out to Bristol trying to understand how Efficiency Vermont can support them in pursuing, hopefully, the MERP implementation grant process and putting in energy efficiency retrofits. And I'm really interested in what you all think Efficiency Vermont can help us with. But it also sounds like maybe there's some information that you'd like from us. So happy to hear more about all of that. We'll just let you know.
Awesome. It's nice to meet you all. So I'm an account manager with Efficiency Vermont. We kind of have a market-based approach, and so one of my markets is municipalities. So I know that not all municipalities are eligible to apply. I've talked to a couple of them, seen some of the audits, and this is helpful for you all to know where we come in and how we can help and kind of what our process is in figuring out incentives. And then I myself am not super familiar with the application program, so I might have some questions to see what you have to say about it. But are you, any of you, familiar or worked on projects before where Efficiency Vermont was involved?
Not on municipal projects, not in my experience. Most of us are pretty new, so.
Okay. So we have, is it too beginner level if I kind of lay out the landscape of utilities and incentives in Vermont?
I mean, I think most of us are probably familiar with the utilities that operate in our regions and most of the rebates and incentives that are available. I think for me, I would be interested if you wanted to highlight anything that's specifically interesting for municipalities, but I think most of us should be on a little bit of a higher level of knowledge.
Okay, great. So with what I have seen from audits, I've seen a few now from the towns that have been sharing them with me. They're pretty similar in what they're advising when it comes to the type of equipment and so on. And so where Efficiency Vermont comes in is if we think of like the starting point of insulation and air sealing, I see a lot of that in these audits. Insulation and air sealing, there's two different routes that we support. One's a custom route. Custom route is the best for larger buildings. If there are, like there's one I looked at that was a larger building because it also had like a huge kind of like meeting hall or event, piece to it. So think of like a commercial sized building, whereas some municipalities, their offices are super small and look like they're kind of like a residential, renovated property. So for the commercial size, probably is going to go through the custom route. And for that, it's kind of, we'll walk them through that process, and it depends on what the current insulation level is versus what's going to be installed, and a blower door test is required. We don't have a way for, I would say 80 to 85% of our incentives, we don't have a way to tell them up front, this is what the incentive will be when they're custom calculated incentives. And I think that's the probably the most annoying piece of the puzzle is that we can't tell them up front, this is how much we will contribute. For HVAC systems, same thing. It's most of the time custom calculated. The one time it's not is if they are installing more of residential sized heat pumps, like mini splits, where we have a point of sale incentive, and it would just go through that point of sale incentive. So that could be ducted or ductless. And there are a lot of buildings that, even though they're larger buildings, are still utilizing the mini splits. The reason why I asked about utilities before is because are all of you from various parts of the state? Yep. Okay. So I know with Green Mountain Power specifically, most electric utilities at this point have incentives to offset fossil fuels. So we're kind of coming at it from a team approach where the utilities typically have some type of an incentive. I know Green Mountain Power, full disclosure, I used to work for Green Mountain Power. So I know that Green Mountain Power can give an idea of what the incentive will be based on the number of gallons of fossil fuels being offset. For us, on the other hand, we don't have a way to give an estimated custom incentive because it varies depending on the model that they're choosing. So the Efficiency Vermont incentives are based on the difference in efficiency between a base model and a model meeting code and going above and beyond that. Some of our incentives, because of the change in code, have decreased. So that's why we're always reaching out to utilities as well to kind of see, okay, what are all the different buckets that can help with it? So to summarize, HVAC, for us, we can't really estimate an incentive until we figure out what the model is of what they're planning to install. So we can say there's most likely going to be an incentive, but the nitty-gritty calculations won't happen until after we know if they're getting the grant and if they're actually moving forward with any HVAC equipment. And that's also when we have engineers on staff. And so that's where the technical expertise comes in as well. So once a municipality says, great, we have the grant, we're moving forward, we're starting to design the system, it would be beneficial to them to loop us into the conversation, the design conversation, because we can help with, okay, what's the right model? What's the right equipment? Where do we go from here? And we talk about both heat pump systems as well as pellet systems. There's been some audits that I've seen point out the potential of a pellet system or wood system. So we can advise on that as well. Heat pump water heaters have a point of sale incentive. We don't have a custom incentive, so that would go the point of sale route. And what else have I seen that we can contribute to? We do not have any incentives for windows or doors. I've seen that pointed out on the audits. I have also seen some appliances. We do have rebates on appliances. That goes through a prescriptive program, so the rebates are online at this point. The main thing to remember is for appliances, they have to be Energy Star rated. Commercial appliances could be custom calculated, potentially, but I haven't seen a lot of commercial appliances. Most of the refrigerators and freezers I've seen in municipalities are kind of the residential sized. So the Energy Star piece is the important piece of the puzzle. So we got HVAC, water heating, insulation and air sealing. Insulation and air sealing, apologies, I know I'm bouncing around. Insulation and air sealing, I explained the custom. If it's more of a residential, smaller sized building, it would go through a prescriptive program. And the most important piece is they have to go through a contractor that's on our, that's within our network. So there's a list of those contractors on our website. They all know the program from, front to back. They'll walk the customer through that. Again, that's for smaller prescriptive buildings.
Yeah, Allie.
Yes.
I also have a couple of questions if you have run out of upfront thoughts. Yep. Go ahead, Allie.
Thanks, Emily. Just curious, I'm sorry if I missed this. Will these municipalities, if they're gonna go for the incentives, they'll have to verify some level of energy savings through, like Efficiency Vermont will have to verify some level of efficiency improvement, like a 20% improvement, something like that? Is that, I forget how you calculate that, and how does that mean, like, you're gonna have to come back out and do another blower door test? Some of these municipalities had blower door tests, but not all of them. So how are you gonna verify those energy savings to then hopefully so they can get that full incentive back?
Yeah, you're correct. For insulation specifically, a blower door test before and after is required. For some of the equipment, let's say HVAC equipment, if they've installed exactly the model that we talked about beforehand. So we go through a process of, after they get the estimate from the contractor and we figure out, okay, this is the right model that they want to go with, they'll submit that estimate to us. We'll do the calculation. We'll draft an incentive agreement that they sign. After it's installed, then we collect the final invoicing and pictures of the nameplates of what was installed. Depending on how complicated the project is, the engineers may want to go take a look in person, especially if there is like a controls component. It's good to be able to see the control system in person. Sometimes if it's a simpler project, having the photos of the nameplates will be perfectly fine to confirm that the exact model was installed, that was discussed, and that all the numbers were calculated off of.
And is it okay if I jump in with a couple quick questions? I just wanted to clarify. So I understand that we need a blower door test before and after for most of the weatherization incentives. Will the blower door test that most of our towns did get through the MERP program count for that initial test, or would we need to get a separate first?
That should work. We always have an engineer look at all the numbers, but a lot of the audits were done by, they're done by actual consultants that do this on a regular basis. So I believe it should be fine. Typically for the programs, we require that they use building performance contractor that we partner with. So because this is a first time grant, I don't know. It should be based on what I've seen, but I don't want to guarantee it. That's not 100%.
Okay.
It also depends on when it was done and if anything has changed since that was done.
Okay. My other question was, do you have a specific like square footage where you kind of cut off commercial versus residential buildings so that we know what to anticipate?
I wish it was that easy. No, we don't. A lot has to do with the type of equipment that's chosen. And, if they're using commercial sized equipment, that typically means that we can probably roll a custom project together where we do multiple different measures in one custom project. But it's so difficult with buildings because there just isn't a one size fits all.
Okay. Yep. No, I understand. I was just hoping for a simple answer for one part of this program. The last part, I just wanted to clarify, I might be the only one in the room who doesn't know this, but how does the custom incentive work? Is that something that they're paid up front to do the work? Is that something that's a reimbursement process? How does that function for the towns?
It's after the fact. And the main reason we do that is to make sure that what was proposed was actually installed. I recently had a project that took a couple years, and the customer, it wasn't a municipality, but the customer ended up installing a different model, which changed the savings. So we pay after the fact to make sure that the equipment is what was proposed, and if not, we might have to recalculate it.
Okay, good to know. All right, Anne and then Jeremy.
So I'm just wondering if we should advise our municipalities to look at your list of qualified contractors for this work in order to ensure that they get the incentive. Because with the custom incentives, is the money still flowing through the contractor?
No, great
Okay.
question. With custom incentives, it goes through us. The most important, we call them measure, the most important measures that we would want the municipality to work with a certified contractor with would be the insulation and air sealing piece. Everything else can run through us. And I do realize that with municipalities, oftentimes they have to go out to bid. So it might be, we might have to kind of navigate this together. Because if they
Yeah.
have to go out to bid and everybody who provides a bid is not on the list, then I don't know what the process for the municipalities is to be able to say, well, for this one piece, it has to be somebody off the list. How can they work within their policies to get that?
Well, I think they could have their bid documents make clear that the contractor has to be qualified, that they're only going to take bids from qualified contractors, and one of the qualifications is that they're a certified contractor with Efficiency Vermont.
Perfect. Yep. Can I add one more thing? Well, sorry, Jeremy, you had a question.
I'm happy to wait if you want to add something, and then I'll ask after. That way you won't forget.
Thank you. I remembered the last thing that I had to mention, which was lighting. So lighting right now, I've seen that on several audits as well. Right now, the new baseline is LEDs. If you buy lights within the state of Vermont, it has to be LEDs. So if they choose to replace the lights one by one, there are no longer point of sale incentives. If as part of this project, they're replacing, let's say 25 or more lights at one time, we might be able to consider it, but it depends on the building. Oftentimes, if the building, I've talked to a couple towns that are open, Tuesday and Thursday, or they have very low hours, and the savings with the lighting isn't enough to warrant an incentive because of the new requirement that LEDs are the only option. So if there's a building that's used more often, kind of regular usage, plus maybe it's used in the evenings for meetings or whatnot, then we might be able to still provide an incentive if they're replacing all the lights at once. Thank you, Jeremy.
Yeah. I may have missed this at the beginning. When you were discussing how the incentives are calculated, the custom ones, how does Efficiency Vermont address things that are not going on but will? And the way to describe this is like the way the assessment reports worked, were if a town only had a heating system and they were recommending a heat pump, they could only calculate the energy savings related to the heating, not the energy savings related to the cooling that the town isn't currently doing. So like when you're calculating incentives, let's say a town has an oil boiler and they're putting in a heat pump and then they're going to use the cooling capacity of that, would you be incentivizing against what like an air conditioner would cost them, or are you just not able to address the things the town will be doing that are new in terms of energy use?
That's a great question. We would be looking at the energy efficiency gain of the equipment they're installing versus code. So essentially what we're looking at is we're trying to incent customers to be as efficient as possible, not just what code requires or what the baseline of a specific piece of equipment is. So there potentially could still be savings depending on the model that they choose. And that's why it's also helpful for us to be in on the conversation during the design phase so we can lay those options out. I anticipate that the municipalities would want to go with the more efficient model, kind of the above and beyond, if the incentives were enough that they could bridge that gap, which between us and Green Mountain Power, or if they're in Vermont gas territory, hopefully we can bridge those differences. And essentially what that does is it helps kind of the taxpayers in the long run. So it is a bigger capital investment up front typically, but the operating costs in the long run is where the savings comes in, which was nice about these audits where they have the payback period on a lot of the audits. That was pretty neat. And the longest payback was typically the solar, solar and the battery piece, and then the HVAC too.
Could I just ask one other quick thing I may have missed at the beginning? So you are able to incentivize things that are already being grant funded?
As long as the grant is not funding it 100%, then yes. If the grant covers everything, then there's no reason for us to spend ratepayer funds to support a project that's already fully paid for through a grant.
Okay, and would you still be able to evaluate the equipment choices if they are 100% grant funded, or only evaluate them if you're incentivizing them?
We can definitely still use our technical expertise and resources to help with the decision of the models and such.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Somebody else has a raised hand.
That's me. I'm sorry, it's Shelley. I can't figure out how to turn myself from unknown to Shelley. So can you speak also to lighting controls, HVAC controls, and ERVs?
Sure. So with any type of equipment, the more you can control it, the more efficiency you will have. We do incentivize controls as well. The process for that is typically we wait until after the project's installed, and then we can come in and say, okay, once it's installed, the contractors commission the HVAC system, or they kind of create that baseline and they set the initial settings in place. We can then come in and say, okay, if we tweak the settings, the controls by XYZ, you can gain XYZ efficiency, and then we can calculate it that way. A lot of times, the controls piece is not as, I don't see often controls being calculated beforehand, because a lot has to do with how it's set up when it's installed. So typically the controls, we go in afterwards and then can kind of play with it more, fine tune it, and figure out what the energy efficiency gains are. But yes, we do have incentives. We highly recommend them. With HVAC, with lighting and occupancy sensors, again, because of the change of LEDs being required now, the project sometimes won't even pass the energy efficiency requirements unless it has occupancy sensors. So highly recommend, especially in municipalities where some rooms may not be used as frequently as others, that they're going to get the highest benefit for them and their energy use if they have the occupancy sensors with it. And then ERVs are same as HVAC. It's treated very similarly in sense of the process.
Carter, yeah.
Sweet. Good morning, or it's definitely afternoon. I'm sorry, I am in a different time zone. Good afternoon to y'all. So I and Allie work in the Northeast Kingdom, or the corner of the state, and we have a number of towns that are going to be going for this funding and hopefully receiving a lot of funding. So to echo how we can fold in Efficiency Vermont, what I'm hearing, and again, course correct if need be, is we will reach out to you and say, hey, we've got this town, here's their energy assessment, here's the scope of work, at least around like HVAC, kind of outline what we're trying to do. And then you connect us to a technical expert, because I'm glad I appreciate you clarifying, because this is 100% funding, like there's no match required by the town. So likely, these custom incentives, but still I would like the correct equipment to be installed, because it's a number of engineers that did this, and actually taking the time to look at the building system would be so valuable. So is that how, so kind of like wait until the awards are determined, we know what the projects are going out, and then bug you to kind of loop us, or what's the best way to do that and make sure?
Yeah, you're correct. We won't see much progress until after the awards have been awarded. That's redundant.
Yeah.
But I've already connected with a few municipalities beforehand, and it's for some of them, they say, nope, we're good, we're going to apply, we don't need anything. For others, I have a chat with them for half an hour to an hour to answer any general questions that they have, and then off they go. So it depends on municipality if they want to chat beforehand or not. And also kind of figuring out the priorities. I know some of they might want to do projects along with it that maybe exceed the cap of what the grant would actually award to them. And then the other thing to note is, I mean, most of these municipalities that I've talked to, unfortunately, are in the mindset of, if we don't get the grant, we're not doing any of the work. But in the sense, in the case that some of them say, we know this equipment is failing, so regardless of the grant, we'll have to do something in the next year, it still is helpful to talk to them and start building that relationship.
Awesome. All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, and I guess I've got a couple of questions that go really tell us in the moment, but we have, I'm sure we have something like 500 buildings that have been assessed through this program. Maybe, I don't know, half of that, a little bit less, is eligible for this funding through the 80 towns that are eligible to apply. And so there are a lot of towns and a lot of buildings that aren't going to get this funding just kind of off the bat. And first, I guess I'm curious if it's valuable to Efficiency Vermont to have all of those reports and to put them all in one place for you guys, to just have maybe a distilled data version of those reports that I know a couple of us have started to put together for ourselves. And then we have been trying to think about ways that we can support these towns that are not eligible for this initial MERP grant funding round, and what are things that we can do to either make the process of installing a mini split, if that's all they can afford to do right now on their own, easier or cheaper, or we're trying to get creative with how to share this load. If everybody wants to do a mini split in at least one of their buildings, that's a lot of mini splits going into the state. So is there a way that we can make this easy for everybody?
I don't, if you can email the audits over, it doesn't hurt. I can save them in each of the files that we have in our database. That's what I've been doing with the ones so far. And we would love to see, of course, municipalities, even without the grant, starting to think about these things, because across the board, many municipalities, even if they're not eligible for the grant, have aging equipment. And so they're going to have to do something in the next few years. And as code changes, that's going to continue to change what we can and cannot support. So it's great to start thinking about that now and building it into their budget in the next year or two, and you know, while incentives and so on are still around. If you have a municipality that you know is going to move forward in the next year, I would say in the next year that they're going out to get approvals and votes and all of that, that would be great to loop us in. If the municipality, and I'm working on reaching out to most of them anyways, so I'll touch base with them, but usually what I see is if it's not going to happen in the next year, the incentives might change. And so we can give them we can answer their questions in general about how, you know, how we view the prioritization of buildings, right? I mean, if it's cost effective, step one is insulating and air sealing, because regardless of how you're heating and cooling, you don't want to be heating and cooling the outdoor air. But I've seen on some of these audits, to insulate means, you know, ripping walls apart, and it's not a cost-effective option. So to maybe help them a little bit of how do you prioritize these projects, we can have those conversations. But if they don't, if they're not going to get projects or work on approvals in the next year, year and a half, then the incentives might change, and I don't want them to get a certain number in their head and then things change, and then they have to adjust what the budgeting and what they're trying to get passed for the budget to be. That's not really a clear answer, is it?
No, I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think the thing that I am struggling with, and I'm sure the other energy planners have had this trouble too, is for most of our towns, you're right. If they don't get grant funding to do a project, they're probably not going to move forward with anything. And so I think what I'm trying to fish for a little bit here is, are there things that we can build around these assessments and these known needs to kind of give them a reason to keep moving forward, even if they don't have a ton of grant support? So I guess I'm wondering, is there a way that we could work with Efficiency Vermont? And I understand you probably can't answer this on behalf of the entire organization. Is there a way that we can work with Efficiency Vermont to put together a program that says, hey, we're all going to assess the right mechanical systems for your buildings. Everybody's going to order at the same time. We're going to figure out if we can do some kind of reduced rate purchasing. You know, is there something that we can do to give them a little bit of a bump, but mostly just motivate everybody to keep moving? Is the thing that I'm trying to figure out right now, because we've got a lot of towns who have been disappointed, and so now I'm worried they're not going to come back to this type of project for another 10 years. And so I'm trying to find that thing that'll keep them moving.
Yeah.
And can I add one thing to what Maddie's saying too? Is the other thing that we're seeing is that, like, say on the point of sale with incentives on heat pumps, for example, it seems like the contractors have figured it out and they're jacking up their prices, and the incentive isn't really flowing through. So that's a concern too. Like, can Efficiency Vermont have a purchasing program where we make sure that's not happening to municipalities, you know, because otherwise we're at the mercy of the contractors that are around and what they're doing.
Yeah, if they go through the contractors on our list, and I'm not in charge of our network, but I do know that the people who are, that they do, you know, spot check and audit and so on, and see the receipts and the invoices. Because I actually had the exact same question the other day internally. So I understand you're not the only one who has that concern. And kind of looking at it big picture, just so you know, we might have some flexibility with the towns specifically that have the high energy burden and tend to have a lower income community. We might have some additional support that we can tap into for that. And then to answer your other question on figuring out a way where maybe we figure out some kind of a bulk purchase, you know, something like that. Great suggestion. I'm going to talk to a couple people and see So I'm going to talk to people who manage our network and our program managers and the My Manager and see if we can kind of come together and start brainstorming something like that. And then even through, one thing that we want to do is also through events. Like we're going to be at the, I always get this mixed up, the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. We're going to be there as well and talking to municipalities about the benefits to the towns and operation costs and the fact that a lot of these they're unavoidable costs, right? That, like we mentioned, the insulation could be avoidable, but the water heaters, the HVAC, like those are unavoidable costs. They have to at some point replace them. So I agree with you, Madison, of how do we keep the conversation going so it's at the front of their mind. So when something does happen, if they can't proactively switch it out, they're not defaulting to replacing it with the exact same unit, just the newer model. And that's the benefit too for us of transitioning to a market-based approach is I can be more invested with them and have that regular cadence and conversations. And, we can even offer things like lunch and learns every, 4-6 months and try to get some of the community aspect of the towns together as well to not lose the traction. But you're right, I don't have an answer now, but it's definitely something to bring up with the rest of our team here and start thinking of. We do have these audits. We have a lot of good information. We know municipalities will have to do things. I don't know with the number of municipalities if we can reach XYZ, like a guaranteed XYZ number of units purchased. So I don't know if that's going to be the right approach. But we'll see. So can you refresh my mind, out of the 500, I know I'm making my way through the list, but how many are actually eligible to apply for the MERP?
Out of the 250 some odd towns, 84 of them are eligible. And I think the eligible towns were granted more assessments, so you'll see kind of a shift so that more of the 500 buildings actually reside in those 84 towns. But yeah.
And then out of those 84 towns, how much funding is there? How many is it per building or per town?
It's up to $500,000 per town, but they can apply for multiple buildings within that. And I think we're at 35.5 million, something like that, for BGS to distribute across those buildings or across those towns. Sorry.
Oh, you're gonna make me do math.
When you divide it out, if everybody got the same amount, it's like $420,000 per town.
For 84 towns?
Yeah.
No. Oh,
like
so there's a potential that all 84 will get grants.
Potentially.
Oh, okay. Do you know, is there anything that stands out for why they wouldn't get a grant?
The way BGS has structured their scoring system, we're not sure.
Okay.
I had a question, but I lost it, so I'm going to let Jeremy jump in.
I had one idea from what Madison was saying and what you were saying, Emily, about keeping things moving forward. I almost wonder if we can collect data, and I don't know if this is something VEIC has capacity for, but if we collect data from all the buildings that implement measures, the 84 towns, and then compile that in a way to show the other towns, hey, here's the savings all these municipalities saw. And it's going to be different in every case, so it'd be a range, but I think that might be pretty useful. Because right now, my experience with working with municipalities is the select boards specifically just want to, like you said before, replace whatever their broken equipment is with the exact same thing, because there's no thinking involved. It's just we have a so many BTU oil boiler, we get a new so many BTU oil boiler. And I don't feel like the theoretical information on efficiencies of different equipment sways anybody. But I think if we were to say, hey, 84 towns had all this work done, and here's the amount of money buildings were saving, like a range of averages, might be a way to, it wouldn't be an immediate thing, but might be a way to keep moving some things moving forward.
That's a good suggestion. And it also has me thinking, I know there are towns who have already done projects, not many, but there are some towns that have already switched over their HVAC. I wonder if those towns would be willing to share and or do like a little tour for people from other towns to come and visit.
Yeah, I think specifically where I feel like that would be important is the towns that have to spend their own money. I feel like all the towns that were saying, yeah, this is going to be paid for 100%. They're like, yeah, sign me up, I'll do it. But when it's like, oh, you might have to spend $1,000, they're like, whoa, I don't know about that. So then I have one other question about the bulk purchasing, and I don't know if it would be worth or in your wheelhouse to get the utilities involved. So like I'm thinking about car chargers at GMP. They just drop ship them to the people who sign up for the program. So I know there is a history of utilities purchasing and sending out equipment to people. I don't know if you think the utilities would have any appetite for being involved in bulk purchasing in that way. And VIC would be able to interact with the utilities around that.
Yeah, the biggest challenge I see around any bulk purchasing is the lack of a guarantee that the equipment will be installed. And that which the way around that is to get all the towns essentially on the same timeline of getting the budget approvals and voted on in order to install the equipment in the same year. So, we would have, let's say, I don't know, 50 towns in the same year installing heat pumps. That's the main thing in my mind that stands out as a challenge. So 50 something heat pumps are not just clogging somebody's warehouse.
Yeah. Do you know how Green Mountain Power addresses that with the chargers? They send out Charge Point and Flow, and I think one other Emporia chargers. Like, I assume they're just having the companies drop ship them. And I'm assuming that GMP is getting some kind of bulk purchasing for having that done. But there's no guarantee that people are buying electric cars and opting into the rate that gets them the charger.
Correct. It's not bulk purchasing. And you're right, it's drop ship. It's not being stored at a GMP facility.
So you think GMP is just paying full price for those?
I believe so. So. Yeah.
Well, then forget that.
Well, that's really interesting. I mean, we have a history, a couple of years past now, of being able, as RPCs and as kind of the VCAN network, to be able to mobilize everybody to sign up and say, yes, I want to do something like this. And so I do think that there is kind of a template to follow. Most of those were residential programs, but I don't see why it would be any harder or easier to manage a select board to achieve the same thing. So I would be interested in talking more about, like, how could we make it as easy as possible for you all to help us do this? If what we need is a list of folks who have it in their minutes that they've voted to support this, I think we could probably move on that. From the kind of logistics perspective, the question I had before was, we've got these kind of regional community managers from Efficiency Vermont that we've been told in the past that we shouldn't reach out to really anybody else at Efficiency Vermont. We should just go through them. And I don't want to skip the chain of communication. Is there are we kind of allowed to have towns reach out directly to you? Is there more than one of you kind of doing this municipal level work? How should we plan and communicate with you? How should we have our towns communicate with you?
Sure. So the main difference between the other people at Efficiency Vermont that you've been working with is they do a lot of like community engagement, not necessarily building project management. I think maybe the easiest thing to do is to send an email to both of us, so we're all on the same page. And then at that point, so if you send an email to myself and let's say Becca would know, okay, they reached out, Emily's got it, or maybe you're reaching out and there's also a piece of the conversation that's around an energy fair. Then I'll say, okay, great. I'll make sure that Becca's on that call as well. So if you already have somebody, then that's great. You can have us both on the email and we'll navigate it. We're talking about the towns and keeping up the conversation and oh goodness, now I lost it. Anybody else have questions?
Does anybody else have questions?
I just want to say that this has been really helpful. We're going to have for those of us that are in GM or VGS territory, which is only 3 of us, we're going to have a meeting with Tim Perrin at 3:00. And I'm just wondering, like, so for example, I know Richmond has been looking for funding for their town hall building. It's really in pretty bad shape. And they tried to bond for it at the last town meeting and it didn't pass. Knowing now that they're not going to get implementation funds, I don't know if they're going to try to go out for a bond again. So that's just an example. I wonder, like, how we would coordinate between you and VGS for the ways that they might be, you both might be able to assist with incentives and other things.
We work with Vermont Gas and the electric utilities on a regular basis. And so once you have, oh, sorry. No. So once if you have a town like Richmond, the best thing to do is just have all of us on a meeting or a video call together. And each of us can speak to whatever aspect we can contribute or support. And so if we're all together on the same page right from the beginning, that's usually what I recommend. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you so much. I'm curious from your conversations with towns, and I'm learning a lot about towns. Like I got the energy piece down, but just around, towns, it's a whole different ballgame. How many towns would you say, if any, actually have funding aside in case a major repair or something like that comes up? Or are they all kind of treading water? I see you shaking your head. Are they all treading water? And if you look at on a yearly basis, their income is pretty much on par with what their expenses are? Are the expenses more than what they bring in?
The exception to the rule is that we have some towns with capital budgets that will set aside like sinking funds for certain buildings that, to set aside money like you're talking about for future repairs. But the rule generally is that nothing is being saved ever.
Right, that's correct. And I think
Yeah,
it depends on the community. Like Milton and Colchester are super fiscally responsible with their capital planning. And they have, I think both of them have projects that are paid for with a penny for parks or, things that they add to the tax rate that the voters have approved that goes into the capital plan. But they're uncommon. That's not common. Most voters don't want like extra money sitting around. They're more interested in their tax rates staying low.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, towns did receive municipal ARPA funds a couple of years ago with the American, through the American Rescue Plan Act. And once there was a change that allowed them to sort of put it into their general fund, and restrictions were removed on it, a lot of them just used it to, get some new equipment, usually like some sort of like a snow plow or something like that. Or a lot of our towns in my region used it to digitize their records because they did not have any digital records. I mean, I still go into a town hall and I'll see a town clerk typing out their land records on a typewriter. On a typewriter. So no, I don't even think any of my towns have capital plans. So
One thing that came to my mind as you're mentioning the ARPA funding too, is there were a couple of audits that I saw that included wastewater treatment. So just keeping in mind as well that we can support VFDs and more efficient motors and blowers and other process equipment for wastewater as well. Thank you, Anne. And then also as you're having conversations with the municipalities, what I like to remind them is, step one is figuring out what to replace and whether we're offsetting and transitioning off of fossil fuels or not. With that, a common comment is, okay, but then my electricity rates are going to go up. And the answer is yes, but your oil or your propane or your kerosene's going down. But also, especially if they're in Green Mountain Power territory, talk to GMP about some of their rate programs and see if you can manage load in a different way. Could you be on like a flexible load management program? Could you bump the rate that you're on? So having that fluid conversation with the utilities as they're planning this, because a lot of times they're going to also be thinking of what is this going to look like after it's installed. Having the conversation with the electric utilities will, I think, help put them at ease a little bit to know what options there are, or just be educated in how to manage that equipment and their load. And going back to the control piece of the puzzle, how to control it better so they can be as effective within whatever rate structure that they are in.
I just want to say, just for example, the Essex Police Department had a heat pump system installed, and it really wasn't installed properly, and they've had trouble with it from the beginning. And they're looking to replace some of the equipment now. So that just speaks to really encouraging the municipalities to utilize a certified contractor, and ensure that they have, the experience necessary. Because that's just really unfortunate, because that's a fairly new building, and they're having to put a lot more money into it now because it was never installed properly. And I think there was also, they had a heat pump hot water heater that was just never hooked up properly until recently, and so it wasn't doing any of the heat pump portion of the heating. So it's really sad.
And do you want to introduce me to them? Because my brain goes to, well, maybe we should do a walkthrough with an engineer and see if there's other things that we can suggest and try to prevent this from happening again.
Yeah, actually, if you don't mind, I could introduce you to Essex that has a building manager, and just say, in lieu of the funding that isn't going to happen, it might be a good idea to have Efficiency Vermont come out and look at the police department and see what's possible.
Great, thank you. And
Yep.
Madison, is it possible to get a list of all of your names in the counties that you're in, so I know who to go to when I talk to people?
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking having us all email you individual reports would probably be a giant mess. And so what I'm thinking of suggesting is maybe we can all put together our own folder of, here are all of my reports. you can have our contact info on a page separately, but we'll just put it in a shared file and you can access it when you're ready, because we do share documents in a Google folder. So I'll try and organize that and get everybody's name on a list for you. Yeah.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
but I really appreciate you chatting with us. I learned a lot, so thank you so much.
You're welcome. Same here. I learned a lot from you as well. And I'll continue doing my outreach as well to municipalities. And so we'll definitely cross paths as we continue to roll through this.
Would it be confusing or helpful if we sent out to our towns, this is Emily Eckert. She's willing and able to help you talk about these municipal building retrofits. Would that be useful as an introduction, or would you rather contact folks at your own speed?
No, that would be very useful. Thank you for offering. Yeah, that would be great.
Sure.
And for any of you, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I think you'll probably get a couple of emails from me, but everybody else, I will see you in a couple days, I'm sure. We've got lots of meetings lined up this week, so thanks.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Emily.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.